Hello, Eddie. Good morning. Good afternoon, I should say. Thank you all for joining me for today's COVID-19 daily update. Yesterday we had a very good day in Jonesboro. The community was outstanding being there, but also listening to the leaders as to what's happening in their community, addressing some of the case issues there. I'm delighted to be back in Little Rock today. I'm joined, of course, by Secretary Nate Smith of the Department of Health, and then I'm also joined by Stuart Walton, who is chairman of our Economic Recovery Task Force, who will have actually a report to deliver, a preliminary report, and then three key members of my cabinet that served on the Economic Recovery Task Force, Secretary Wes Ward of Agriculture, Secretary Mike Preston of Department of Commerce, and Secretary Stacy Hurst, the Department of Parks, Heritage, and Tourism. Let's first go to the cases, which has been a challenging day, to say the least, in the last 24 hours. First, I'll just give you the numbers. Yesterday, we had 6,277 cases. Today, we've had an additional 261 cases in Arkansas, which represents the largest number of community cases in one 24-hour period. That gives us a total of 6,538 cases to date in Arkansas. Of course, there's been 4,583 that's recovered, so the active cases are much less than that. In terms of hospitalizations, our hospitalization has gone down 4, from 108 down to 104. In terms of deaths, we have an increase of 5, so we're at 125 deaths as a result of COVID-19 in the state. Let's go ahead to the first chart. You can see that in graph form, where the number of cases, and we are up at the 261 level. The next one you'll see the rolling average, which will catch up since we had a day up. It'll go up again, but today it's on the right trajectory. And then if you look at the next slide, we'll look at our test. I failed to mention that in the last 24 hours we've done, well, all total, we've done 67,500 tests in Arkansas this month, obviously exceeding our goal. And then I think the next slide is the percent positive test, which we did 2,966 tests over the last 24 hours, which gives us a 3.9% positivity rate. And so we're continuing the increased number of testing here in the state. And you can see that our testing results still is very, very positive, with the 10% being a national standard or goal objective. And we've been down below 5% over the last 3 days. So the positivity rate is very good, even though the number of cases goes up, which simply says that we're testing more, we're learning more, and we're identifying more cases in our community. Of these new cases, we had 85 in Benton County. We had 25 in Washington County, 22 in Pulaski, and then it sequences down from there. Those are the three big counties that we had the largest number of cases. Of the cases that we had, 261, 42% of those cases had Spanish surnames. Now, we want to explore that more carefully, but it indicates a consistency and trend that we do have challenges in the Hispanic community in terms of our outreach, making them aware, making sure we have the testing there, which we're expanding, we're learning more, and we want to really have an increased effort in outreach with our Hispanic community and other minority communities to make sure they're aware of the risk and the actions that they should take to protect themselves and to protect their families. One point I wanted to make about these cases, just to, because we emphasize that we do contact tracing on each of these cases. And as Dr. Smith has indicated previously, on the average, it's 2.5 to 2.8. I think 2.8 is the technical number that's used for each case. You'd have 2.8 contacts on the average that are having to contact and reach out, and and then to have them quarantined or isolated as well. And so if you take those 261 cases times the 2.8 plus the 261, you have 992 individuals in Arkansas that may have to be isolated or in quarantine for 10 to 14 days. Now, that is it's a real consequence to someone's individual life, and in terms of their work and their productivity, taking care of their family and all the other responsibilities. It's just another way to emphasize how important it is to control this virus and to reduce the spread, because with the contact tracing, it impacts not just the case, the individual, but everybody who's been in contact with that person who might have contracted the virus as well. And so those are a couple things just to be mindful of. One other comment just on the geography of this. We have seen early on in this pandemic cases in Pine Bluff, Pulaski County that soared, not the right word, that was where the bulk of the cases were. And then we saw Crittenden County, we've seen Northeast Arkansas, and then we've seen most recently Benton and Washington counties that's had an increase in cases, whereas before they were almost looked like they didn't have hardly any cases. And so it's a sequential movement almost across the state with many different isolated geographic areas of a large number of cases. Right now, Sebastian and Crawford County have a reduced number of cases. Congratulations to them, but it's almost a wake-up call to say, what's ahead for us? We need to maintain our vigilance and be careful with this. And so we have to protect ourselves, we have to protect others, and we simply have to plow through this pandemic, keep going, keep being careful, and protecting our loved ones. With that, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Governor. I'll give a few more details on those numbers. As the Governor mentioned, 261 new cases, all of them being in the community. This is the largest single daily increase in community cases. Of our total 6,538 cases, 1,830 of those are active cases. 71 of those are in nursing homes. 374 are in correctional facilities. 1,385 are community cases, active cases in the community. We have had, since yesterday, an increase of 8 healthcare workers who have been infected, additional 8 nursing home residents, and additional 6 nursing home staff. As the Governor mentioned, we did have a net decrease of 4 in our hospitalizations, so we have 104 in the hospital. We have 27 currently on a ventilator. That's an increase of 5 from yesterday. The Governor already mentioned we've had 5 additional deaths, so our total deaths are 125. We have had 4,583 recovered. That's an increase of 159 from yesterday. I'd like to give a little bit more detail on where those cases are coming from. The Governor mentioned our top 3 counties, Benton County with 85, Washington County with 25. We also had 22 from Pulaski County, 17 from Crittenden County, 12 from Craighead County, and 11 from Sevier County. All the other counties were fewer than 10. I want to give a little bit more detail on some of these cases. As I've mentioned, the largest 2 counties are Benton and Washington County. They represent more than 40% of these new cases. Of the cases in Benton County, 76% of those were in Rogers. And of those 85 new cases in Benton County, 85% of them are from the Latino community. In Washington County, 80% of the cases were in Springdale, and 40% of the new cases, the 25 new cases in Washington, were in the Latino community. In Sevier County, 45% of the new cases were in the Latino community. The message I'd like to get is that with this second wave of COVID-19 cases that we're having, it now is focused in northwest Arkansas. There seem to be rapid increases in our Latino communities, particularly in the northwest part of the state. We are also seeing younger individuals. The average age for the new cases in Benton County was 40 years old, with a range from 3 as the youngest and 72 as the oldest. In Washington County, it's similar, average age 38, with the youngest 3 years old, the oldest 78 years old. In Craighead County, where all the cases, new cases are coming from Jonesboro, the average age is only 26. So we're seeing younger patients. We're also seeing more cases who are asymptomatic, or at least not yet showing symptoms. I was asked the other day about what proportion of our cases have no symptoms. Overall, of our total 6,538 cases, half of them reported no symptoms at the time they were tested. In our local health units, we've been testing and not requiring people to have symptoms, and of those who have tested positive in our local health units in the last 2 weeks, last week and a half really, 74% have reported no symptoms at the time they were tested. So we are seeing we're seeing people who don't have symptoms at the time that they test positive. What I'd like to talk about lastly is what we're going to do about it. In terms of additional testing in the northwest part of the state, we continue to offer testing 5 days a week in our local health units, 79 local health units throughout the state, and those include Benton and Washington counties. We have a number of testing events, as you can see there. We will also add some additional testing events, particularly in Benton and Washington counties, because we're seeing the largest increase of cases there. And also, we would like to work with work sites who may want to offer testing on site for their workers. If that makes sense for them, we'd like to partner with them to work on that. Having safe workplaces is an essential part of our economic recovery, and a really good way to get access to people who may be at risk for COVID-19. With that, I'll turn it back over to the governor.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And now I'll ask Stuart Walton, again, chairman of our Economic Recovery Task Force, to come. They've worked so incredibly hard, day in and day out, working in committees, working in subcommittees, listening to industry and business and community leaders as to where we need to go to bring our economy back and stronger than ever before. And they have a preliminary report that they have worked hard on, and I wanted to introduce Stuart to have the microphone and to go through some of the highlights of that preliminary report.
Thank you, Governor, and good afternoon. We are delighted to present the Arkansas Economic Task Force preliminary report or interim report today, and we plan to publish it tomorrow on the website arkansasready.com. Also, I'll make a personal commitment here today to make sure that the report is posted in Spanish language as well as English, and we will work to translate some of the most important documents on the Arkansas Ready website into Spanish in light of the case numbers and statistics that the governor and Dr. Smith have shared with us today. So we're excited about doing that and really tackling this head on. Let's just take a look here at the next slide. These are some of the recommendations that have come through the task force work. There's a handful of them, and I don't really want to go through all of them, but testing and tracing, we repeatedly hear from industry leaders, health experts, see it in surrounding states, that this is how we're going to get our feet underneath us and move forward through this virus. And the task force is exploring a number of ways to continue to work through testing and tracing resources and develop that in the state. Without fault, we can't seem to host a meeting of the task force without liability concerns being expressed. They're expressed from one side of the task force to the other. We've heard it from religious institutions. We've heard it from the educational institutions, from employers of all stripes. And while there's not a perfect solution there, we are setting out a few recommendations here for the governor, and we're happy to stand by and work with him to find a solution here that helps provide some certainty and some clarity for the businesses and the institutions beginning to work again in Arkansas in this new environment. If we look at the next page, we've got some childcare recommendations around resources, funding, and availability. This has been sort of a subcommittee has led this work, and again, a little bit too long to go through, but all of you will be able to sort of get through the report in due course once we post it on the website. Into the next one, a couple of final slide here on the recommendations, some workforce training. This has come largely with the leadership from the community colleges and institutions of higher learning. And there's a select set of recommendations around investments to be made there for workforce training. And there's been a special attention paid to the importance of broadband and connectivity throughout the state, but it's the rural areas of our state that don't have as good of access as they should, and the task force would like to call that out and bring that to the attention of the state, and also work with the governor to find a way forward there to improve that. I would say, since April 18th, when the task force has been established, we've had over 25 different calls, 4 calls of the full task force, but really most of the work has actually been done in the subcommittees and the committees. Secretary Hurst, Secretary Ward, Secretary Preston have been leading those and just doing a really fantastic job. The state should be proud of their work, which has been on top of their existing duties, and they've done just a really great job. I think that this slide actually shows something we probably all feel, which is that significant economic challenges are present. You can see examples of it across the state, cities, communities, restaurants, everything. And we expect the economic headwinds to persist as long as the virus is here. And I think that generally reflects this notion that these are inextricably linked crises, the economic crisis and the health crisis, and you're not going to solve one without solving the other. And so with that, I don't want to spend too much time on this. It's a narrative that's familiar to all of us, but it's some specific data that backs up the point, and it, I think, underscores the importance of the Economic Recovery Task Force and the work that we're doing. Finally, I think I'd just like to say that I'm concerned with some of the numbers and the increases, but I'm also optimistic. I think you can't look at the numbers and the graphs and the trends without being a little bit concerned. But I also think it's really important here to note that the increase in cases that we've seen is not statistically correlated to the steps that we've been working to put forward to get the economy reopened. I think that's important despite the sort of famous Mark Twain quote around statistics, and there's 3 kinds of lies, which I won't necessarily go into, but we do have this information, we do have this sort of story that's unfolding in the data. And it's really important not to latch on to any single data point, but to try and look at it comprehensively. And I still come away optimistic about where we are and the path that we're on. Overwhelmingly, Arkansans are doing a good job. I'm sure we've all seen examples of people who are probably not doing as good a job in terms of maintaining the social distancing protocols. But we can all do better. And if it's a friend of yours, tap them on the shoulder and just say, you know, we're all in this together. We do need to work better and harder at getting through this. And like I said, these crises are interrelated, and we're not going to solve one without the other. With that, I think I'll leave it there, but thank you. It's nice to be here today, and look forward to getting some feedback. We're wide open to it, so fire away once you're able to see the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. In the good old days, I would actually receive a written copy of that, but everything now is electronic, so it will be up on the website. And I've actually have taken a look at it preliminarily. And I want to thank the task force and Stuart for hard work in making these recommendations. I have reviewed them quickly. I've not digested the entire report yet, but I will do so. But I'm impressed by the significance of the recommendations. The recommendations in terms of child care services that are so critical to our workers, to the broadband initiative and the increased funding that is necessary for that, to the other recommendations in terms of our workforce and continued emphasis on workforce training and funding of that. Those will be helpful to guide funding decisions of the future. I know the General Assembly will be interested in this report, as well as the CARES Act Steering Committee that will help direct some of this funding as well. So thank you, and with that, we're happy to take questions.
Is there any common thread in the Latino surge in terms of their employment?
Well, we're still looking at that, but clearly there's a large number of Hispanics that are employed in the food processing industry, and so we see that. And whenever you look, whether it is in DeQueen, where you have a large Hispanic population, as well as poultry processing, we want to look further at that correlation, but there is some impact there. So we do see that, and you know, they want to work, they're hardworking, and we want to make sure we get the information to them to keep them safe. Dr. Smith, did you have anything to add to that?
We have emphasized work sites because for adults who are working, they spend most of their waking hours at work, most of them. But this is larger than a workplace-associated outbreak. This involves entire communities. As I showed their age range, a 3-year-old is not working in any industry, as far as I could tell. Our fastest growing age group is the less than 18. So this is again, work sites, workplaces can be a place where adults do interact with each other and facilitate the spread of COVID-19, but this is really in the entire community.
Just on that point, on the new cases, have you determined if any of them are connected with workplaces?
Yes. Again, it's difficult to get lots of information in a very short period of time. Our team works very hard to do as much as we can, but I will share with you what we have so far. In DeQueen, we have 2 that we know of associated with who work at the Pilgrim's Pride facility.
Questions?
Sounded like in the report the task force is recommending some type of liability protection for businesses. Is that something that you support? And out of those 3 options, do you favor one of those options?
Yes, the report suggests three alternatives. One would be utilization of the governor's executive emergency powers. Secondly, a special session. And thirdly, that be addressed in the regular session next year. I think the benefit from the report is that it does express very clearly the high level of need for liability protection. And then secondly, it helps to educate the policymakers, the decision makers on it. This is something that I've always supported, reasonable tort reform, but as to which one of those alternatives is a good means to accomplish the recommendations, I need to hear more from the General Assembly. I have a letter from the State Senate, many members of the State Senate, and I want to hear from more members before any decision is made as to which path makes sense and what the next step should be. Yes?
Why do you think we're breaking a record today? In the past, you've said that it's because of increased testing. Is that the case, or is it something more?
Well, clearly we wouldn't know about this number of cases if we were not doing increased testing. So testing is very related to being aware of this. Secondly, as Dr. Smith indicated, there is a second wave, or there is a new increase in cases just in Northwest Arkansas that we've tested before up there, but we did not have this level of cases. And so it's a combination of expanded information through testing with spread of the virus in that Northwest Arkansas area. Is there any questions remotely? Are there?
Yes, Governor, good afternoon. It's Neil Gladner in Hot Springs. Clearly, with the need for, on behalf of what the committee said about liability protection, I'm sure you know you'll get questions from people who will say, gosh, if they get liability protection, will they take the necessary steps to protect workers? And I'd like to ask you to respond to what you know was coming on that.
Well, it's a good question, very appropriate, and you have to have a balance that if you have liability protection, and that's broader than just the workers, because the workers, and this is what's important, is that they are able to exercise their remedies through workers' compensation if there's a causal connection with their contracting COVID-19 and the workplace. And so they do have a remedy, which has historically been the remedy in the workplace for the employees. It's also very, very important that the employers do the right thing. And as Stuart mentioned, the vast majority do exactly the right thing. In fact, they go even the extra mile to provide a safe workplace. But that's something that is subject to regulatory oversight as well as the guidelines from the Department of Health. Stuart, did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I'd add is that I think it's really seen by the Economic Recovery Task Force as a potential drag on the state's ability to recover economically with a large degree of uncertainty in this area. And so, like the governor said, it's not really targeted towards workers as much as it is the overall business environment and the various stakeholders that a business has. Clearly, a business doesn't want to do anything that would risk its customers because that would risk its business. But there's just such a level of anxiety among business owners, managers, religious leaders, educational leaders around what kind of liability would I be exposed to if I did reopen and somebody did get sick, that it's just been a resounding theme in our meetings, and we're just trying to encourage people to address it, talk about it, and it's not about picking a partisan side. It's about trying to find a way for the state's economy to recover.
So, a follow-up question. So, do you guys have a proposal, or is this just a soundbite?
I just said that for the first time ever, so it's definitely not a soundbite. And there's more fleshed out in the actual interim report.
Is the report going to be available today?
Tomorrow it'll be posted on the website.
Is there a reason why it's not being available today?
I think the governor hasn't had the chance to read it yet. We just presented it to him about 30 minutes ago.
Okay.
Let's go remotely again.
Hi, Carl Richter, Texarkana Gazette. Are there any plans to focus a testing effort on food processing plants like the one you mentioned in DeQueen, maybe by going on site to do testing?
Well, many of the processors, the employers have engaged in testing efforts on their own and screening of the employees. We have also, at various work sites, concentrated on that, and we'll look at that in the future. But Dr. Smith, did you have something to add?
Yes. We've really had excellent partnership with all of our work sites where we've had clusters, and in some cases it makes sense to come on site and do testing there. Others it makes more sense to send them to the local health unit or to their private providers. But certainly we are open to working with work sites, whether they've had a cluster or not, on strategies for testing of employees.
Remotely, one more question.
Yes, Governor, this is Chad here with KNWA News in Fayetteville. I'm curious if this kind of growth rate continues in Northwest Arkansas specifically, will you consider a regional approach to any new directives, whether it be in terms of new restrictions or in terms of moving forward with phase 2 of reopening?
Actually, I think the way we've approached it has demonstrated to be successful and important. It shows that, for example, in some areas of the state that they might have a low caseload, it's important to keep the statewide restrictions and guidelines in place and not make them exempt, because they could be the next place that we might have a wave or an outbreak. And so we have to remain vigilant across the state, and I think it's been important to have those statewide guidelines that we've put into place. In terms of Northwest Arkansas, we have adequate, we're in phase 1. We've opened up some of the economy, but it's, for example, restaurants, it's 1/3 capacity. There's limitations in place. We're not going to go back, but we want people to follow those guidelines, make sure that they do everything they can to avoid the spread, and we can get through this. But I don't think there's a way to single out Benton or 2 counties and say we've got to put more onerous burdens there. And then back to the table, then we'll go remotely again.
Are the decrease in hospitalizations connected at all to the 5 additional deaths?
Dr. Smith.
I don't have specific information on that. When we say there's a net decrease, what we tend to see is we see people admitted, people discharged. Of course, if people are in the hospital and they pass away, they're removed from that. So it's not a one-to-one correlation. It's a very dynamic setting, but we did have five deaths. I don't know if all of those were in the hospital before they passed away, but there were certainly individuals admitted and then also discharged at the same time.
Yes.
Governor, do you expect there to be more peaks in the future? And if you see any more, would you consider requiring masks everywhere?
Well, the question is, do we expect any more peaks in the future? And one thing the public health team has taught me is that we've never been through anything like this before. There's not any way that we can gauge history and say what's going to happen. And so there's a lot of unknowns in the future. What we do know is we need to make sure that we protect ourselves, protect others, and as you said, follow the guidelines, and particularly in the social distancing, because we want to move, we want to work, we want to live, and to do that you've got to be able to do the social distancing. In terms of making that from a guideline into a directive, I don't believe that is what we need to do. I think, one, you have a real enforcement problem there. I don't believe people expect to use the power of the police to do that, but we will be doing reminders, and I expect people to use their common sense. Our strategy has been let's educate, let's inform, and let's ask Arkansans to use their common sense. And once they know, by and large, they make good decisions. Sometimes we have to remind them, and we'll continue to do that. And let's go, there was a lady remotely, lady reporter.
Yes. Hey, Governor, this is Kendall with 4029. How many people are hospitalized in Northwest Arkansas with COVID, and is there any concern about having enough beds if our numbers continue to go up?
I'll let Dr. Smith add to this, but I did talk to hospital administrator today in Northwest Arkansas. They're adequately supplied. They are able to handle it, and so, as well as doing their additional service to their non-COVID patients and the surgeries and medical procedures that are needed. It's something we continue to watch.
I don't have specific information on how many are hospitalized in the northwest part of the state. We can get those data and are happy to provide those. We're not anywhere near the capacity for those facilities. And as we've been testing more individuals who don't have symptoms or don't yet have symptoms and testing younger individuals, we're likely to get fewer hospitalizations, per case. Because the highest risk are those who are older, who have underlying medical conditions, and who have symptoms, of course.
Have you seen any connection between the new cases and Memorial Day activities?
I have not seen any data that indicates there's a connection there at all. Is there another question remotely? Is there any other questions?
Governor, this is for Dr. Smith. On the contact tracing, if we come back to this for a moment, you mentioned the numbers you talked about would mean 992 individuals that would have to either quarantine. I'm curious if in contact tracing, are those people immediately tested?
In our contact tracing efforts, we initially reach out to them as soon as possible, give them instructions about self-quarantine, and then we do try and get them tested as soon as possible.
Last question.
Can you tell us what fields the healthcare workers were in, specifically hospital, nursing home, private practice?
I don't have the full breakdown of those from today. We can certainly provide that information to you. We do know that 6 of them were staff at the nursing homes. And again, most of those healthcare workers who have been infected have recovered, but we can give you a more detailed breakdown later.
Excuse me. Thank you very much today. Thank you.